Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. Today, we'll be looking at autonomy and how you can build self-organization into your teams. A little bit of background about CTO Craft, if it's your first time at one of these Bytes events. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. The number of members is now over 5,000, so you're in good company. CTO Craft provides one-on-one coaching, mentoring, groups, a curated Slack community, and wonderful events like this one. So if you're not yet a member, there should be somewhere down the bottom there, I think there is a button. Anyway, if not, you'll find it on the website, ctocraft.com. A huge thanks to our headline partner, AWS, for helping to make these events possible. So today I'm joined by Vlad Galu from 101 Ways Consulting. He's a consulting CTO. And Marcus Lambert, who's CTO at Omobono. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. If you've joined to see Claire Donald from Moo, unfortunately she's indisposed today, so we wish her a swift recovery. Vlad, would you like to say hello?
Sure. Hi, yes, I'm Vlad. I've been in technology for about 20 years, building and shipping technology products for wide audiences from millions to billions. For the past 2.5 years, I've been consulting with 101 Ways in a CTO capacity. 101 Ways is a product and technology consultancy based in London and Amsterdam. So we pretty much predicate on building cool things quickly. That's about it. Happy to take Q&A on that later on.
Mm-hmm. Marcus?
Hey, so my name is Marcus Lambert. I'm currently the CTO at Omobono. We are a digital agency. So we take projects from clients in the B2B sector and build products, build solutions for them. My past is kind of due to my age, I've got a lot of experience. I've mainly worked in corporate development shops, in-house development, and founded my own software company for a number of years, VC backed, etc. That went away, and now I'm now in a digital agency now, leading the teams there. So I've had this kind of nice mix of kind of corporate development, enterprise software development, and also kind of startup development. And now I kind of do projects for our clients in the B2B space.
Okay, great. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dan Smith. I'm one of the CTO Craft coaches and running one of the mentoring circles. In my spare time, I also act as a consulting CTO. At my own company, Partners in Tech. So we're here to explore the topic, but also to answer some of your questions. So down the bottom there, you should see an Ask a Question button, and you can click on that, and I will do my best to pick up on your questions. So to kick us off, what does self-organizing mean to both of you?
I'll go first. If I were to simplify it, it's 3 things. The context, being able to see enough into the future to make both short and long-term decisions, as opposed to being fed piecemeal information about where the business and the product need to go. 2, having every skill you need to achieve the outcome you desire available locally within the team. So to not rely on third parties, whether or not in the same company or external. And 3, and this is probably the most important, building time into the process to measure and readjust as you go. Looking back at a chunk of work you've done, think about how you can do it better. Not just in terms of simple sprint retros, for instance, but even at a higher level, looking at judging the success of the product by measuring the engagement, usage of features, and all of that again and again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Vlad. Marcus?
Yeah, I echo many of those points. For me, the biggest advantage probably of it is, continuous improvement, of the team, it's self-contained, things like, I think you amplify things like team inertia. You have higher levels of motivation inside the team, because you're empowering them. So you get to value quicker. You typically, we find at Omobono that you have a much higher degree of communication within the team, and so everyone's on the same page quicker. And as we all know, in software development, actually, that's normally one of the biggest problems is actually getting your team on the page, because generally everybody can build something. It's just communicating what you want to build and how to build it. If everyone understands that, you typically can move pretty fast and get that inertia. And then it's also this kind of group accountability aspect of it as a team, that you feel more empowered to be accountable as a team rather than any individuals. And I'm sure Vlad and yourself, as being a CTO in the past, everybody likes to copy you in on everything, and then suddenly realize you're the bottleneck for everything. If you've ever read, I think the Michael Lott book about managing humans, it's quite funny. It talks a lot about the head of a VP of engineering or a CTO being the bottleneck for everything. That you forget to forward on the emails to the right people, and self-organizing teams, it takes a lot of that away from individual bottlenecks, and that allows speed and inertia and delivery to value quicker.
Well, just mentioned that in many places we see that speaks of a lack of a succession planning. So ideally, if you're happy with the C team you've built, ideally you'd want to have grown someone into capable of taking over while you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, so you don't have to, as to avoid becoming the bottleneck yourself, as you say.
Yeah.
So you've both touched there on some of the reasons why you would move to self-organization. Our audience here typically mainly CTOs, so they might know some of those things. We might have a few CEOs who might be learning there. So what would you say to a CTO who wants to convince his CEO or his company to move to self-organization? What would be the top things that they need to do, first steps?
Vlad, do you want to go, or for me, I think it feels, if most teams are using some sort of form of agile, I would say nowadays maybe they're not, but if you are, I think this is maybe more of a natural extension of that goes, takes it to its kind of probably ultimate point, and it's it's back to those points I was talking about earlier around inertia and speed. I just think you get stuff done quicker, and it's the right stuff. It's really that simple. And so convincing a CEO, that's a very powerful statement, is that you're doing the right things and you're doing it much more efficiently. So that's what it really boils down to, I think, and probably what will prick up a CEO's ears of those two great points.
Mm-hmm.
You can wax philosophical about this in many ways, but there are a few smells you can actually point out to a CEO, I think. So they might say, yes, well, everyone has done exactly what they were asked to do to a T, but that's the conversation around output, not around outcome. So a good measure of success is if you just look at how your customers engage with the product, you would know exactly if the investment into every product or every feature has been worthwhile. What you see in lots of companies where self-organizing teams are not a thing, there's a lot of work simply wasted on bets that are not verified. The outcome of those are not verified until a year or so later. So you end up with bespoke features that only serve one customer out of 100, or features that never get used. And all of those will have taken a lot of valuable time and energy and juice, as it were. And those are all things that are measurable. Now, in lots of companies, they're hard to measure because the measurement processes are not in place. There's no one looking at that, no one even thinking about those things. So yeah, something to, obviously you need to do a lot of research, and your own systems are your best bet. Backlog features, builds, metrics across the board. Those are the things I would advise any CTO to rely on initially to be able to better sell that idea to the rest of the leadership team.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that comes up to me as imagining I'm the CEO, is like, okay, autonomy, self-organizing, it sounds a bit out of control and risky. What would you say to me about that?
I think that's always going to be a valid fear. That if you come from more of a traditional organizational structure where it's like a bit more command and control and has a lot of hierarchy, I think that would be a fear. I think I think in practice, I've never really seen that fear come to fruition. Really, I think I think with engineering, I think this. I think it never gets that far to be out of control, because I think actually people do know what they want. They do know that, teams themselves actually do know what they need to do. They just need to have like kind of the right inputs and outputs. And sometimes it's about giving people the freedom. I think some of the fear is always based around the C-suite, or the structure is relinquishing control. They feel that holding on to control makes things better, and actually it's the letting go is actually drives the change, and actually is much better. And talking about this kind of bottleneck, even simple scenarios like that, to begin with, that's a fear. You feel like I should be involved in every conversation, but suddenly quickly your day becomes just moving information around, and you're not actually adding a lot of value. Whereas you really want, most people want to add value, and forwarding emails around to relevant people in the team isn't about adding a lot of value. So I think, that's where the fear, you feel like it's fearful, because it feels like the right thing. It feels like you should be involved in everything, and letting go and disseminating the kind of power to the team. But I don't think it ever transpires. I don't think it turns into chaos. Certainly doesn't turn into chaos ever. I think it actually is a very positive thing, because it really drives up motivation.
Mm-hmm.
What I see mostly when that fear manifests itself, it's typically in those places where there isn't that much strategy at the top to begin with. So it's not the fear of someone having a good idea that wasn't yours. It's just maybe the fear of not understanding what that idea means in the first place. So one sure way to do self-organizing teams badly is when you don't really have a top-level strategy, because they will strategize and then they will execute, but you're not in a position to validate that. So your best people will leave at that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I think back to that last point, I think one of the nice things about self-organizing teams and the inertia and the motivation it brings is that you actually counteract some of that, because you are going to change the culture. It will affect the culture of your organization. If it comes from a command and control place to a self-organizing kind of organization, it will change the culture. And generally that's that's highly motivating for people, and they don't tend to leave, or don't tend to leave for those reasons anyway. They may leave for other reasons, but they don't tend to, that isn't because I don't want to work here because, my ideas don't ever get listened to, or I never get a chance to, influence value,
Yeah, Marcus, when we were speaking before, it was interesting how you're self-organized in your organization, Omobono. Could you share a little bit about how you are self-organized for the...
Yeah, so Omobono itself is obviously slightly broader than just, the engineering side of Omobono is just one area. We have big creative teams and UX teams and UI designers, and even pure play strategists as well. So, there are, people who do research around business, and because we play in this B2B space, so it's a lot more than just plain engineering. And for a long time, we've engineering has always had, things like the Agile manifestos and Scrum and all, we've been playing in this space for many, many years. But as most organizations, there may be areas of organizations who wouldn't have worked in that way. So a few years back, we made the decision as an executive team to actually push self-organizing teams across the whole of the business. So be it, everything from back office to HR to, to all the functional areas like strategy, UX, UI, creative, etc. Everybody has self-organizing teams now. So we've kind of gone to the next step, making the whole organization. Now, obviously we're not a product organization, which many of the audience is here. So it's maybe much more simpler because it's ultimately is an engineering company. Maybe with marketing and, when they get to a certain size, have marketing and HR bolted on and sales bolted on. So I guess maybe, we've taken that next step to empower everybody in the organization. So we have this notion of circles, which are these teams. They're cross-functional teams. They'll have members from every functional area of the business. So we have one called a membership team, and that discusses, that team manages employee benefits, employees, the REMCOM, should people get promoted, should they get a pay rise, bonuses, they're all managed by that team, and people can be a member of that team if they want to be, and be involved in that. And so that's a good example of a cross-functional team. We have other ones that look around back office. We have other ones, around the systems we use. We obviously, maybe by the nature of it, with the client work, we have self-organizing teams. So when a piece of work comes in from the client, obviously we form a team around it and it organizes itself. But we also have a client experience team who look after our processes, how we communicate with every client, the experience that client has with our organization. So we've taken it way beyond anything in engineering and pushed it out across the business. And I wouldn't say it's been easy. It's certainly from an executive point of view. I remember, if for us as an executive team, it's felt like we're relinquishing a lot of control, but we've gained a lot of benefits because a lot of those teams would have, their responsibilities would have been with the executive team, deciding who gets a pay rise and what that process is would typically be, probably somebody's executive team or on the board or something. So relinquishing it down has been an interesting exercise. But the way we've kind of looked at it is, it's a mindset shift in the business to make this as a cultural thing that anybody can be on any team. There still is an executive team, but we define our responsibilities and our roles for that team very closely. And typically they're around the vision of the business and, the more the kind of mentorship and coaching the rest of the business to do to work towards a North Star or, to this vision. So it's much more about coaching than it was about saying you should do this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we found it a very interesting exercise over the last 2 years. It's definitely not something you can click on overnight and just say this is what we're going to do. It's definitely more of a mindset of what are the experiments that we can do, and you know, we've made our own journey, and we look for experiments. You know, can we form a team around this and see if it works, form a team, and we have many failures, you know, where we formed the team thinking that it was a good idea and it didn't work, and so we've had to go back and find another experiment and then start again, and we found our own way about it. So, you know, I don't think there's a blueprint you can just pick off the shelf and go for it, but I think it's a mindset of experimentation, very agile in some respects.
So I've got a question here from Richard, which I think touches on that. So it's about the C-suite and feeling as if they still deliver value when they let go of control. So you've kind of described how it's different, that they be coaching. I mean, you as a C-suite executive and your peers, do you still feel that you're delivering value, or is it somehow diminished?
Yeah, it's I don't think it's diminished. I think it's just, again, it's a shift. I think we did a lot of work to work out what our actual role is in the organization, and I think so we did some deep work as a team to work out what our roles and what our actual accountability and responsibility was to the organization. And once you start getting that down, and you realize what it is, and then, you know, to begin with, that tends to be a really long list. And then you realize actually some of this can actually sit with other teams. And, you know, we actually are the bottleneck of it. It should sit with another team. And then you realize actually your role is this kind of linking coaching role. And because you sit across teams. And so you're helping share the information, and two, you're helping coach people and creating leaders and empowering people. And when you realize that, that's a very valuable role in the organization, rather than saying, as an executive, we make all the decisions. You know, because not all the time we do make all the right decisions. You know, you tend to live with those decisions, but there could be better decisions made. That's the point. So I think, you know, it's all about the mind shift into a coaching mindset. So it's fair. You get fair about it, though, as we said earlier. You know, I don't think it's super easy. You know, it does take a while.
Vlad, did you want to add something there? Or if not, I've got another
question.
Yeah,
in my mind, there's an evolving the scope you give yourself as C-suite technologist changes with time. So, you know, if you're in a small startup, you care about every single thing, but as that business grows, if you keep on doing that, you will not really be helpful to the business and to your own team. You have to divorce yourself somewhat from the day-to-day things and start looking further ahead into the future and have a more outwards focus. You need to start thinking about what kind of technology organization the business needs long-term, what sort of core competencies, how do you identify as a technology business or technology practice within a business? In other words, you shouldn't try to continue doing what your team are already doing better than they do. You should try to find things they can't yet do, either for lack of experience or context, and do those things to help them. In which case, you shouldn't feel like you're being threatened in any way because you operate in a different dimension than they do.
Okay, great. Arta here has raised the question of ownership and accountability. So that makes me think of where you might have specific things like regulation or security, or, you know, specific things that really have to be met. How can that be done within the context of self-organization?
That one is sometimes a bit of a tough one. It does come up a lot because sometimes, you know, the compliance or the regulation kind of requires, like, you know, who manages information security, the ISO, you know, ICO has got someone on the hook, and it generally is a director of the company, you know, or it's actually the governance around the board is actually on the hook for it. So so that's like, let's say, an external factor that forces it down to maybe individual or a very small team of accountability there. So I think you do need to be wary of those things. And those areas are slightly the trickier areas, because you do need, say information security, it should be joint ownership from everybody in the company, really. So there's lots of valid ideas and processes that go around it that people need to be involved with, but it does ultimately, from a compliance point of view, probably means one person's on the hook for it. But you've just got to make sure that that person is part of those teams. So I think it's just a slightly different. It's just a little bit of that external factor just needs to be factored into that self-organizing team. Whereas in certain areas where there's no compliance around it, it's a little bit more free-fall. I still don't think when you form a team. So we have quite a prescribed process when we form a team. We do some deep work, like what we call chartering a team, and that is going back to Vlad's point: is what are the outcomes? What are the things we want to hear if we're successful as a team? And so we spend a lot of time defining what our outcomes are as a group, and that one of those outcomes could be compliance. Yeah, we are compliant to XYZ. And so that's quite clear. It's a clear outcome for that team. In other areas, the outcomes, can be slightly more woolly. What's a good client experience? You could say sometimes you describe it with, I would like to hear clients say, I'd really love to work with you again, and I would recommend you, and so they're kind of slightly more nebulous. Whereas compliance could be quite black and white, which is good in some respects, because you're on one side or the other side. So we use that process of chartering to make sure everyone's aligned.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. So I've got one question here that I think we could treat as a mini case study, and as we've got Vlad here, who's the consultant, maybe we can ask him about this. So this is from Stuart. So where C-suite staff, that was he's deliberately put in there for me to trip over, are gatekeepers for the main roadmap deliverables for a product, what tactics or strategies are best to get more of the product ownership decisions back to the Scrum team? So Vlad, if you were called in to work with this company, imagined company, would you consider them self-organized? What would you recommend them to do?
I already touched on some of that, and it all has to do with measuring. So looking at all of that gatekeeping personal group of people, looking at their decisions and measuring the actual outcomes and presenting that to the board. But if I were to give the same advice to someone who's on one of those product teams, especially if your product is targeting a technology audience, any kind of PaaS or SaaS, try and get as much external validation as you can, as early as you can. We meet here. We meet in various other forums. Just show people your product. If it's good, they'll want to use it. They will have suggestions. Bring all of that back and show that interest. I call that bottom-up business development. If you can, if you have a good product where you integrate that feedback from prospective clients, make it very easy to onboard. Make it so that they don't have to talk to someone in sales just to get a demo account. They will start using it, you'll start getting feedback, and then you show the actual numbers. Here's the engagement from these people. And we did that from the bottom up.
Okay. Anything to add, Marcus?
No, I think Vlad said most of it there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Stuart's asked, are there some desirable boundaries around self-organization?
Yeah, I think you need. I think if I get the question right, I think it's I think it's like you were talking about earlier, if a team is going to form, it should be chartered properly and people understand the role of that team, its outcomes, and, maybe their individual commitment to that team as well. I mean, that's come up a lot for us is, people want, to begin with, everybody wanted to be in everybody's teams. You just feel like, hey, great, this is, but then you soon realize actually, your role in that team, what is that role? Are you the person who shares things between teams? Are you actually doing the deep work in that team? Are you the subject matter expert, etc.? Or you're facilitating all these different things, different roles within those teams, and you need to come to those outcomes, the roles, and doing a kind of slightly formal chartering of that team quite quickly. So if that's what's meant by these kind of boundaries or guardrails, those are the kind of things you need to have in place to effectively stand up teams quickly and bring them down. Is to have some not a lot of process, but some process around it, some rigor around it to do it effectively, and that you learn that. And that process changes over time as well, and because as new teams stand up, they have ideas of like, this is how we did it, and then that information gets shared, and then the next team, would probably use that, and typically they're picked up in retrospectives, because we have a part of one of those guardrails is retrospectives for every teams. If you're running an engineering team, you probably have that anyway. But other teams around the organization are now have adopted retrospectives for continuous improvement. Mm-hmm. So those, if that's what the question was, I think those are the kind of things you need to have in place to effectively use self-organizing teams.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thanks, Marcus. Another question here from Nicola. Adopting agile mindset and practices across the whole organization is a big challenge. From your experiences, what were the main challenges of transforming team and adopting a self-organizing culture? And how to prevent common mistakes? Vlad, I think you mentioned before that you've been involved in some horror stories as well. So, I mean, is there something we can learn from these kind of things that have gone wrong as well as when they go right? What insights can you share?
Yeah. So I'll try and keep it quick. I'll keep it short and sweet.
We have plenty of time. So
okay. The most common mistake I see is companies thinking that agile is something that only engineering must do to achieve success, and everything and everyone else is absolved of having to think that way. So what happens is the what and the why, what we need to do and why, is predetermined by the time it reaches product teams. And the only dimension that can be where this constant measurement and readjustment can be applied, and learning from experience, is the how. Now, there's something to be said about different disciplines, like sales being they're inherently more reactive than others, but that doesn't mean that those people should not be exposed to the process, to seeing what happens in the engine room. In most cases, well, actually in every single case I've been around, after a few weeks and months of that exposure, they started approaching things differently. They started understanding that it doesn't, if you have a really quick win, if you get your hack done to close that deal next week, you might not really build anything lasting in the long run, because you've built hack upon hack upon hack, and in the end you don't really have anything. Going back to that point I made earlier, how many bespoke features do you have? How many hacks for how many customers? In short, one of the horror stories that I'm happy to share is from a previous role of mine I had, where the leadership team of this company was based on one continent, all of product management was based on another continent, and engineering was based here in London. And as you can imagine because of the time zone difference and the different cultures, the communication flow was not necessarily the best. And then you had the leadership team with their view of the world and the markets they wanted to be in, and then product management with their own. They were halfway around the world. Is not very conducive to building a global product strategy. It kind of grew from let's do agile in engineering to slowly flying people over to where the engineers were and where to the place where the actual measurements of success could be really made. And it definitely got better after a while. I hope that's still the case. I haven't been with that outfit in a long time now.
Well, if they're still trading, it's probably going a bit better.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Vlad. David's question here is about, if I've understood it correctly, is about the key people not feeling they have the power to change the direction. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a kind of paradox, I suppose. The key leaders have to say, okay, we're going to self-organize, but then the soldiers, if you like, need to then do the self-organizing. So what do you say to the leaders if they want to self-organize but somehow don't feel they have the power to do that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure there's a right answer for everybody here. I guess I can talk about how we did it, which was put that vision, that North Star together as an executive or leadership team, and say this is where we want the company to go, in the direction that we want to go in. And you could bring that down to a product level. This is where we want to go. These are the outcomes we want to achieve. Happy customers, whatever your outcomes are, and define that quite formally, and then allow everybody else to organize around that North Star, because that way everyone knows the direction that even if whatever level, the general direction that you need to travel in, and it unlocks that creativity and that responsibility of those self-organizing teams, because they're working towards that. And that's what I think the leadership, leadership, whatever you want to call them, should be defining, is that kind of vision and North Star, and keep tending it, because it is a roadmap. It's always, it is always changing, because everything else changes. So it's not that you do it once and then off you go. It's, you got to keep managing your vision and keep changing your vision to keep moving it forward, as you would do with a product roadmap. If you're building out for 6 months, you then, keep 6 months ahead or 3 months ahead, whatever, people are doing, for each of their individual projects.
So at some level, is it always a leap of faith to get these kind of things off the ground, or is there something you can do to make the chasm close up?
I think it's adopting. I mean, I think when we first decided to do it as a company, I felt very fearful until I realized there was a lot of agile in it. It was as technology leaders, we're actually quite used to this, because we've probably been practicing quite a lot of agile, and it suddenly, once I dug into it, it resonated a lot with me. But to begin with, my initial reaction was quite fearful. So I think we have a lot of the skills, or seen a lot of the patterns that are used, more broadly in a company. So I don't think it's a leap of faith. I think it is working these small moves or experiments. Where do you start? And just don't be scared of failure. I mean, as engineers, we tend to, we'd love things to always be right every time, but we write a lot of bugs and all those kind of things. We have lots of failure around us, and we fix them up. And we go through a process of iterations and making it better. And I think if we have that mindset and just identify a few experiments, it becomes easier, rather than them going, oh, right, it's a leap of faith. It's just, you need to have the mindset of going, what's this small move? What's this small experiment we should do? Should we form a team around this and then get going with it? and then then retrospect, do a retro on it, work out if it was good or bad, and then adapt it.
What there's a lot of reluctance in companies where the culture is largely based on blame, and people are afraid of making any kind of mistakes. So big or small, and that loops into one of the other questions I see asked by Luke. Have you encountered the situation where the execs don't believe that the teams are going to make the correct decisions? And that largely maps to that blame-based culture scenario where you're not allowed any room for mistake. And the reality is, yes, well, if you don't allow for mistakes, then nothing happens. Either good or bad. People will always do the bare minimum they can get away with it because they can. That's how they mitigate risk.
Yeah.
So if you're in a company like that, would you say that that's not ripe for moving to self-organization? They need to fix this culture and mindset first.
Absolutely. Some companies that have tried it, they were not really themselves ready to create that psychological safety for making mistakes, create that space to learn from mistakes, make small bets, and that goes hand in hand with how they worked on their roadmap. There was no measurement and readjustment. The effects of the bets, the outcomes of the bets were measured after a year, when obviously any mistakes made along the way would have been very much amplified. So at that point, heads fell, people left, and no lesson was ever learned.
No, yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, knowing what I know now, if I were to start a business from scratch, I would be careful to not slide on that slope. But given my current consultancy role, most of the time I land in situations which are a bit like that. And at that point, all I can ask is, well, you've tried it your way a number of times and you're still in the same place. How about we give it a go?
How's that working for you? Yeah.
And so extending that then, do you think there's any organizations where self-organization is just simply not appropriate?
I can think of two ways to do that badly, to try it for all the good reasons and fail. A, when there's no real strategy from the top. And two, when the people on that team lack experience, because they need to be able to fill the what and why gap themselves. And if they're at a too early stage in their career and they're still focused on the how, they may not always be able to fill the what and the why gap.
Mm-hmm. I see Luke's asked another question. I think he's asking a little bit more kind of, if I understand, maybe what the steps would be. So Marcus, you talked about making these first small changes, getting started. Have you got some maybe more concrete examples of what things people might try there?
Yeah, because we were obviously trying to push it across the business. If that's the kind of level you maybe where the question's at, we just tried. We picked a small functional area of the business. Like, I mean, larger business would have probably called them a division or something. That seemed receptive to it. Receptive to the message, and we enabled them as coaches from an exec team. So we'd done it on ourselves as an exec team, where we'd practiced a lot of the things ourselves, but then we identified another team in the organization which felt like they would be advocates. They resonated with it, and we enabled them to do it with their own team, and got them off the going. From our learnings as an exec team, we used let's say our tools that we had learned, the way we organize, even down to the way we organize the Trello board, and the processes we have, like the chartering of the team, etc. We empowered them, taught them how to do it, and got them going on it. And then that transferred, that was successful. Okay, it was a bumpy road, but a few iterations, it was successful. And then we used that team to be the advocates and like the trainers of the trainers for the rest of the organization. So they formed another team, which was this common central, it was called the core team, and they learned and they went out and taught other teams how to do it. But I'm not sure that, that may not work for everybody. And I'm a firm believer of shifting to that mindset of experimentation and, doing small moves is a better way than just grabbing something off the shelf and just saying, oh yeah, Buffer do it, or, Spotify do it, that's what we're going to do. And then expect it to work. Because I think everybody's organizations are different, and people's mindsets and states of culture and, how much blame they have, or, etc., are all very different. And so you have to work out your own journey. So you need to enable yourself to have your own journey, not just grab it off out of a book. Yeah. So think about enabling yourself to go on that journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something people often forget, isn't it? That their own journeys, no two journeys are ever alike, if you like. I mean,
no, yeah. So it's really getting into that mindset that it is a journey, and yours will be different from everybody else's. You just need to be able to make the next small move and then assess, and improve and then move on. Yeah.
Mm. But you mentioned there that you use Trello.
Yeah.
So sort of knowing how other people make their journeys useful as well, right? If you're, I don't know, going on a cycle trip, you might take the puncture repair kit and know how to use it. Maybe Vlad also, what kind of process tools to help the process?
I tend to not get hung up on tools and processes, because at the end of the day, you can misuse any tool and any process. And that's been the bane of my existence for the past 2 years consulting. It doesn't really matter if you do all the ceremonies, if you have all of the differently colored hats, and if you use all the tools that people say you need to use, until people spend time talking and listening to each other and information gets shared. Pick one, simply put. Pick one of anything, and if you get to the point where you feel that is the bottleneck, only then consider switching to something else. Not before. I'm working now with an organization that has about 5 different systems where they can log work and tasks and requests and user stories. And a good deal of those are empty tickets. They lack description. So, all of those tools are better at some things than others, but they're all badly misused.
So you're suggesting the tool is more for kind of capturing this information that's come out of conversations and sharing it, rather than managing a process.
Yeah.
And is that how you're using Trello, Marcus?
Yeah, so like I say, Trello is just a way of, so our engineering teams don't use Trello for their work. Yeah, so they use a different ticketing system, but across the company, we probably couldn't give Jira to everybody, whatever, because it would just blow, if you're creative in our business, it would be too complicated. So you want something that's much simpler. So it's just a way of structuring those conversations, as Vlad says, pulling an agenda together quickly for action meetings, having a list of your outcomes. It doesn't matter. It could be in Excel. It could be in Notepad. Who cares? Yeah.
Well, we don't really want to go that far. But...
Yeah. Notepad plus. Yeah. But it's just got to be in a central place that everybody can, have access to it and, and understand it. I think we, looked at Trello just because it was just the first team, we started using it as a blueprint, and then it was used from there onwards. I don't think it was any conscious decision to do it because of that tool at all. As Vlad said, the tool is not important. The conversations are important. It's just having a central place that you can go to go reference those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I imagine that the transparency as well, if people across the organization can see what other people are doing. I don't know whether that's, so you would consider that important.
Yeah, we have full transparency. Any team can see anybody's Trello board. Yeah. And same with, so, we use Teams, and I know a lot of people use Slack, etc. Each of those teams has their own Teams room. It's totally open to everybody, because that helps in the information sharing. And, when you want to go, well, where's that team up to? And, what have they got on their agenda? You can just jump into their board or jump into their channel and ask questions.
I can think of one very specific thing that some places do better than others. It has to do with how granular the context is and where it sits. You often see lots of shops where they put, to be able to figure out what the product does and what the strategy is, you'd have to go through all of your Jira tickets, because it only lives there. So it's, for instance, if you have Jira and Confluence, better to have your product designs and high-level thinking captured there and then linked back from Jira, as opposed to sprinkling bits of information into your task management system. That's one very, very specific, very tactical thing that I can think of. But, Jira and Confluence don't matter. You could do that with any other combination.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. They've got a question here from Sachin. It's quite a long one, and I haven't quite managed to parse it as well as keep track of the conversation. But if I understand, it's about someone who's in a team that's feeling a bit unable to let go, to sort of get into the spirit of the autonomy, self-organization. What can you do as a leader to encourage or help these people kind of enter into the spirit of it, if you like, and become a full functioning member of a self-organized team? I mean, I guess it comes back to the coaching you were talking about earlier, Marcus.
That's what it is. There's always going to be, people are going to adopt it personally as individuals at different speeds and, be in or out of it. And we as an organization, we saw that, we had people who were like resisting it and then, then became the biggest advocates of it. And that was through coaching. I think you need to, as a leader, need to identify those people where they are on that scale, and then either give them the appropriate coaching or try and get underneath of why they're resisting it. What's not working for them, and then facilitate. Sometimes, as a leader, you're a coach and a mentor, and sometimes it's about mentoring, sometimes about facilitation, sometimes about coaching them. And I think and it could be also about giving feedback. It could be that actually the behavior is not a good behavior sometimes, and it's about giving that honest feedback. As a leader, that's what we should be doing. We should be giving everybody great feedback and honest feedback, really. And that may be the case, and sometimes that is the case here.
My advice would be to start early. That looking for that mirror image of yourself that you want to leave in charge of that team to lead, because otherwise what you will need to do at some point is bring someone external who will not have the same rapport with the product and with the rest of the team as your most competent team member. So ideally you'd want to, I always prefer promoting from within to hiring externally for that reason alone.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you find you have time for doing that? I mean, I guess if you've given up and sending the emails telling people what to do, you've got more time to deal with this kind of thing. Is that fair?
Well, yeah. Ideally, if you can do it on a one-to-one basis, face-to-face, if and when that's possible again, versus an email.
I've got an interesting one here. How far have you delegated budget ownerships to teams? So I guess a little bit like the kind of regulation compliance. How about managing budgets? Is there a risk things could get out of control?
We've started doing that. It wasn't one of the first things we did. So we've gone around our teams and said, what do they need? From typically companies have a soda. There's a bunch of people at the top who have like sign off on certain areas to a certain level. Yeah. And we've gone to the teams and said, what do they need? What sign off levels do they need? And so we're doing experiments around that at the moment. So I wouldn't say we've cracked that nut. And I was saying in certain areas we have, and in other areas we haven't, because I think most organizations do need a budget, and they do need to keep on their monthlies, so they know how they're tracking against that budget, because they how much training do we do next month because we haven't made the revenue this month, and you may defer or hold back money depending on you need to make those decisions sometimes, and that's sometimes much becomes a challenge with self-organizing teams, because they may not understand all the dynamics of it yet, as I'd say is definitely yet. So we're running a set of experiments to allow that budgetary control to go down into those teams, and seeing how it works. I mean, ultimately, I think we have a goal that it would be. The vision is that it would disseminate. But we're working our way through it at the moment, really. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's a tricky area. I think we recognised it is.
Yes,
it's a good question.
Yeah, well, I think they've all been good questions. So thanks everyone in the audience for coming along and for asking these questions, and especially thanks to Vlad and Marcus for giving up their time.
Thank you for having us.
Wrap up the session today and look forward to seeing you in the next CTO Craft Bytes. So thank you very much to everyone.
Cheers.